So could it not be used as a risk mitigation tool inside the diff account in the event? I mean, would that be advisable? I don't know.
Yes,
It would
it's
be.
often what we recommend, and financial advisors recommend to cities who are setting up diff programs, is that to take some of those excesses and put them aside, because you're going to have unexpected costs in the future, or you're going to have more projects come along that you need to have that cash on hand to be able to work with. Rather than go back into the general fund and allocate it out again.
You could do it that way, but if it's in the general fund, then it becomes susceptible to free cash certification every year, right? If it's kept in an account from the diff, then
It
essentially.
stays in the diff account, yes. And I misunderstood you. I was thinking you were asking whether the diff account should be bifurcated. The diff account does not go back into the general fund, so I didn't know if you were saying you could set up, if you will, a reserve within the diff. And again, I would defer to the auditor whether that is necessary. If it stays in the diff account, it does not go back into the general fund. What I was trying to determine is whether you were suggesting that it goes from the diff account, and then within the diff account, you have a separate account for, say, contingencies.
Recommend the auditor. I'm just curious, like, I don't want to get too far off track, but I'm just thinking in terms of a risk measure.
Currently, right now, what happens is, a few years back, I believe the council voted on setting up what they call a sinking fund. So at the end of each fiscal year, we get a letter from RKG, or the finance office does, about what the revenues were for that particular year. That part of that revenue goes towards the debt service payment. The remaining bit of that revenue, even though it comes into the sinking fund, at the end of the fiscal year, that fund gets closed out, and that money has been the last few years, because I believe it's only been happening for 2 years now, goes back into the general fund as general fund revenue. And then it gets closed out, and it gets closed out, and it does drop into our free cashes. And then we look at our revenues that were received.
So maybe that's an enhanced way to mitigate some of this risk, is potentially about reevaluating that policy. I don't know. I was just sort of thinking.
No, it's been anticipated, as you know, Councilor, we're converting diff debt at this stage. The 10-year bans are now rolling. So the anticipation is there will be other monies that will be required because our debt service will rise. So the anticipation is that money would stay in the diff account.
So there will be essentially a shift in policy.
Well, I believe that's the case. I would really need to sit down with Mark myself and make sure that that's been discussed. But we have to anticipate a diff debt, which we do. Every year we get a report from
Right.
RKG. So
I'm not worried about us hitting our number. I'm just trying to think out loud. Is there a better way to be doing things, knowing that, right, we're going to be assuming more debt via,
Oh, yeah.
via the parking
Absolutely.
garage. It just helps maybe eliminate some of the unknown.
Well, again, the additional diff costs or the additional diff borrowing that is going to be necessary to go forward will necessitate higher debt payments as well. So that will all be considered as we go forward. But as far as policy on whether the excess diff revenue could move back into the general fund, that's a discussion I would certainly entertain and certainly be happy to bring forward to Mark and the mayor's office.
So back to the project. Thank you very much, Greg. We're talking about roughly less than 14,000 square feet, right? What is the total land size of that lot?
It's approximately north of 5 acres, closer to 6.
Okay. Yep. I thought I remembered that 5 acres. That's why I asked the question.
The last meeting, there was somebody with a calculator suggested that it was 6% of the actual buildable land, less than 13.5. But as Councilor Leanne pointed out, when you add some of the easements, it changes that number somewhat. But that's really.
I mean, again, I know it was very eloquently illustrated in the last meeting that it's not a large piece of the actual public land because we're going up and that's how we're getting density. So we think about, or I think about anyways, the total land that we have at our disposal and the fact that this is less than 14,000 square feet. And the hope that it does become an economic driver that, right, momentum breeds momentum. So I heard it here said this evening, if you do nothing, we get nothing. But, it is my intent to continue to move forward with progress in the downtown. But again, I just think it's important that we're talking about a district that's set up for development. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about a land area. It's less than 14,000 square feet. And I think to me, this will kind of grabs my attention. We're talking about a project that's roughly going to put out 124 spaces, 126 spaces.
126 spaces.
Call it 600, 650, or 700 spaces to be determined later. We're talking about anywhere between an 18% and a 20% guaranteed stream of revenue to help offset the debt that's going to be created from the parking garage. That's important. So we are mitigating a portion of that risk by knowing that we're going to have a determinable stream of revenue from this particular project. Right?
Yes. Another piece that has been a little quiet on, every so often I like to bring it back to the forefront. The development program has been anticipated to add density to an area that was very, if you will, small buildings in the downtown. The downtown district was not generating a ton of tax revenue for the city. But another factor that I think goes undersaid is that when you add, as you said, 78% of the west of Chestnut project is now leased up. When you start to look at these projects as they go through, it also puts citizens living in an area that was largely industrial and, if you will, office space, maybe not the best and highest use, and some retail. But now you have eyes on the street. You have citizens living in these buildings that are eyes and ears. They are vibrant. There's better lighting in the downtown. There's more activity in the restaurants. It creates a better environment. It becomes a safer environment. And I think that's a big piece that everybody has to continue to remember. When you add people to the mix now, you could go through there, and Mr. Gary gave great testimony that he couldn't figure out where he was going to eat until he found a seat. I think it's important to note that when you are going through that district, you pick right up on what he was saying. Great restaurants, activity, more citizens living there. The investment, eyes on the street, people walking their dogs, people pushing strollers. This is what we're seeing in Quincy Center, which we had not seen for years. So I think that's important from a planning perspective. But we are, I think, vitalizing and injecting people into the downtown, which is one of the most important things that we're accomplishing with this.
Yep, agree to that. And my final point also worth noting is, as we continue to realize growth in construction, in people, etc., that we take that new growth and pass the savings on to the customer, pass the savings on to the citizens in the form of when their tax bill hits. I think, as I like to think, there's an inconvenience that comes with construction. And I understand home values go up and all that stuff, which is all good. But some of that savings, how do we manage the money and ultimately help positively impact the rate there at home? So with that being said, as I mentioned, I think momentum breeds momentum, and I'll be supporting this evening. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, Councilor.
Councilor King. Councilor King.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This has been a very interesting debate. I'm sorry that this last meeting, I know that there was some lengthy discussion that took place there, but I do want to first thank Mr. Geary for his world-class professionalism and responsiveness to all the questions for every single person on the council. Don't give me those looks. Just because you don't have those looks. Okay. But in any event, yeah, this has been very interesting. I came here with very mixed emotions today, just because I feel like we are sandwiched in between, you know, some interesting things that are taking place in Quincy, sandwiched between what was recently a tax increase, which I know has been a very difficult thing for citizens and taxpayers to swallow. And so, you know, when you see new flashy things that come before us, and I fully agree with my colleagues to my right that we do need to keep the momentum going. You know, we've seen some very important steps taken already, but on the other hand, I also agree that there does need to be a rebate of some sort paid back to the taxpayer. You know, they need to see some value for this. At the same time, we do have residents that want to see downtown improved. And far be it from me, as we went through the URDP amendment number 4, I certainly don't want to be a person that holds up this progression. But I do expect more. I think that, you know, in the absence of what was the master plan and that master developer that is no longer here, no longer in the picture, the market has totally changed. You know, what at one point we were once looking immediately at the downtown area, you know, is now broadening into greater Quincy. People are looking at this city as a destination, and I think we should be, instead of just waiting for people to come to us, I think we should be going out and attracting them, and I think we're fully capable of doing that. I'm happy to see some of Quincy's finest participate in this, but I also want to see more competition. There are no options that we're presented with tonight. This is only one project. There's no option B. This is a 115-story, 124-unit project. And, you know, I would like to see options, and I know that we can generate them. As far as I know, this was a publicly bid project, and this seems to be the best way forward. And it is a little difficult not being at the helm. You know, we are presented with the facts that we are, and we need to make decisions based on how we interpret them, how we feel, and how much we trust the people that are making these decisions. And, you know, I very much, after all that we've gone through, especially the past year, in making these changes to the RDP and making this deal go forward, I trust in the capabilities and the decision-making of you here. So I thank you very much for putting this forward. But again, you know, Quincy's growing up in many ways. We've seen home values, at least assessed and otherwise driven by the marketplace, increase exponentially over the last 5 years alone. I think the median home value has gone up 25%. That's incredible. We're growing up, and some of these pains are really difficult. And it's really difficult also trying to assuage the fears of the residents who've lived here forever. But if we want to grow up, we need to be making new friends. So that's just what I want to hit home tonight, is that I don't want to sit here, you know, I don't want the administration to be sitting and waiting for people to come to us. We need to work harder to attract more, because this not only should be a place where people can live and eat and play, there should be some more commercial activity down here. I want more businesses, and I don't think we're doing a good job of that. But thank you again.
Councilor Pelletier.
Thank you, Councilor Forrest. I'd like to make just a couple comments, and then I have some questions that I'd like to ask. But I'm going to make the comments first, so that nobody. Wait, we can take a recess.
Are you on?
I don't know. You all right there?
Yeah.
Okay. It's better that way if you
Huh.
can. But I'll ask the questions after I make the comments, because I don't want anyone necessarily to respond. So at the top of this comments that I was writing down that I wanted to make, I wrote, the subject is things I don't like. And it's about the project, it's about the process. And as Councilor Finn had said, and that's kind of what got me thinking about it, is that this isn't our project. This isn't our proposal. This isn't our agreement. This isn't our deal in terms of how it was negotiated, how it was developed. What Councilor Kane just said couldn't be more accurate in the sense that this is a binary decision for us. It's a yes or no. It's not a, well, we'd like to paint a different shade over here and do something a little bit different this is a yes or no. It's a binary decision. And I think that, as Councilor Finnan said, if I were directing the ship on how to do this, I might have done it a little bit different. But that's not the case. This is what we have in front of us. But I just want to, for the record, say a couple of points of things that I have issues with in the way in which this was done. One of which, again, raised by Councilor Kane, is why not invite and encourage the best and brightest from anywhere and everywhere to design our downtown, to say, this is what should go here, this is what could go here. I would think we would be better served with future land use decisions, at least for public land, obviously, that this council would consider for disposition, of an open RFP process. I don't believe there has been an RFP process. It wasn't on this particular site. And the mayor's addressed that, Mayor Koch's addressed that and said no one else was going to build a 15-story building. And perhaps they wouldn't, but what else would they have built? Our only comparison here is a 15-story luxury apartment building or, a 48-unit stick-over podium. I have to think that in the great sphere of development and architecture and design, somebody else would have had another idea. I would have liked to have seen that. Maybe this would have been the best, and perhaps it is, because I'm not suggesting it isn't, the best deal that would have come out of that process. But as I've learned in being a city councilor, a lot of good comes out of the process, regardless of where you get in the end. And whether or not you want to go through the process, it's always better to go through the process to see different options. And then when you arrive, perhaps at the same final destination, you feel as though you traveled further and you learned more through the process. And I think as we go forward as a government, we owe that to the residents to look, to cast a far net for designs, for ideas on how to develop the city. Yeah, and certainly that's not in any way meant to disparage Peter O'Connell. I mean, I think he's, as Ian said, he's the best and the brightest that Quincy has. I just think moving forward, we need to see what the best and the brightest of anywhere and everywhere has. And that, not doing an RFP process, I think also plays into my next thought, which is the fact that I can't get over the fact that the city is the master developer, and we have never had a discussion about that either at this body or in public, that the city of Quincy is the master developer. There are things I think that cities are good at, and I think there are things that cities are inherently bad at, no matter how hard they try or how much they try in terms of doing the right thing. And I don't know that any city can be a good master developer, especially a city of our size where we don't have a redevelopment authority. We have an overworked, understaffed planning department who does a fantastic job on a daily basis. But I don't know that the city should be the master developer. And that's a discussion that we have never had, again, at this body or with the public at large. When the Streetworks LDA was presented to the council in its formation before we voted on it, there was a public process, a very robust public process where the model was taken from neighborhood to neighborhood, and the players were all involved and there to answer questions. The mayor's staff, the development team making the proposal, and folks could really go and they could ask questions, and they could participate. Now, we have public hearings, we call them public hearings, where we open it up, we gavel it in, okay, public hearings, anyone who wants to come up. It's not the same to me. One, people don't show up. I think you have a community meeting, you take the debate to somewhere that's closer, to somewhere that's more intimate, where they don't feel like they have to get up, they know they're on QATV, they speak into a microphone, where they can just be with their neighbors and the principals and ask questions in an informal way. I think that is a good process. I commended the mayor when they did it before, the administration, and I would urge them to do it again. That didn't happen with this, and maybe because it's too small of a thing to do on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis. Perhaps, there may be reasons for it. But I think the more we involve the public, the more input we get from the public, again, the better project it would be. And lastly, as it relates to the URDP, this is yet another project, I think, that just really shows that we are not putting the URDP in practice. We've spent countless hours up here talking about the URDP, debating the URDP. The URDP is the plan. It's our goals and it's our values in writing so that everyone knows when it comes to the downtown, this is our values. This is what the city of Quincy, based on public meetings, based on public hearings, based on countless debates, this is our values put into writing. This is what we want to see transpire in the downtown. This is what we want to see created, and this is how we want to see it created. This will be, should it move forward, get approved. This would be the 4th project, 5th project, somewhere around there, in the downtown redevelopment zone, the district, that doesn't reflect what we've all agreed upon is our values for downtown. Namely, workforce housing, affordable housing, housing that folks that you want in your city, nurses, teachers, firefighters, police officers, those kind of housing that can be afforded on those salaries. That's what we're talking about, workforce housing. We're not talking about, again, people without jobs, people that have no income. We're talking about regular people. We're talking about the middle class. We haven't seen any affordable housing in the downtown projects that have been approved, and lo and behold, this project doesn't have any affordable housing either. We simply aren't following it. We're not holding people accountable for the parking. We're not holding them accountable for the affordable housing, the workforce housing, and we're not holding them accountable for public art. This is just another incident of, and we're told, you got to get it going. They're the first one. You got to do that every time. And I've made this argument every time. The next guy's not going to take a different position than the guy before him. You gave this to West of Chestnut. You gave this to Peter O'Connell. You gave this to this one, that to this one. Why would the next guy come in and get in line when he knows the city in the past has been willing to give up on these values and give away these things, negotiate away these things that we've said, these items that we've said make for a vibrant downtown. And it's just one more step on the slippery slope of creating a downtown that doesn't reflect our values. So, and I say that not in a way to, kind of to be a jerk about it, but that as we move forward, I'm going to keep banging this drum because I think it's important that we all keep it in our forefront when we're moving forward, when developers are coming forward with projects downtown. I think it's important that we draw a line in the sand and say, okay, at what point are we going to actually require them to pay into the parking fund? We've always discussed that, is that every development downtown is going to pay into the parking fund, the shared parking. And now we're getting to the point where we're talking about how much the parking is going to cost. And we don't have a fund yet. There's been, multiple projects approved. We don't have a fund yet to tap into. We're going to have to tap into the taxpayers' fund. And then with the expectation that in the future, we're going to hold developers accountable to pay into the parking fund when we haven't done so yet. So, and again, I understand there's been reasons why developments haven't been held to that standard thus far, but I hope we're quickly approaching the end of that to where we are going to hold developers in the downtown area to the standards that we have set out in the URDP. That's our plan, that's our values on paper, and we need to start living up to what we all agree the downtown should look like and the values we want to see in it. Now I want to ask a couple of questions if I could, perhaps. First to you, Jim, Mr. Shea, if I could. I want to talk about the lien language that Councilor Finn had talked about, and I think he had kind of addressed earlier too. That language was not in the LDA prior to, so let's use it, when it got to us. So when it was submitted to the council, that language wasn't included?
The language that's been added since?
Correct, yeah. Say that again?
Yeah, it's basically clarification language. I think that, it wasn't just, I think it had to be clarified, which agreements are coming back to the council. Shouldn't be subject to interpretation. In some cases, it was. We need to clarify that. Okay. Use restrictions, those were they were there, but the use restriction was basically I said to the team early on. I said I think it's certainly a residential use restriction, but it's got to be more than that because we've got to incorporate this high-rise concept because that's the rationale for all these other incentives.
And that's a protection against a year from now, the land transfers from the city's possession to developers' possession. And they say, well, Mark doesn't dictate, we're going to do 48 units, five stories, stick over a podium, and then we look at the contracts, and we can't do that because we look at the LDA and say, oh,
well,
gee.
I was less concerned about that, and it's really the lender, the mortgagee protections. The lender comes in, and they always say, I'm putting my money into this. If things go bad, I've got to get it back. So the traditional position for a lender is to say, if it doesn't work out, a use restriction, I want to wipe that out. I want to go to the highest and best use that will allow me to recover my loan repayment. And basically, they can't do that. There was a provision. I think it was just throughout the agreement, but one of them, I think he may have pointed it out a month ago, or whatever, that there was changes, that there could be changes made to reasonably accommodate the requirements of a lender. And that's arguable. I mean, someone could say, yeah, that's fine. I mean, if they've tried the high rise and it didn't work, then why isn't it reasonable to throw that out? Well, that was taken out.
I have no recollection of that, but I talk so much, there's bound to be some value in it somewhere.
I don't know if it was in here, but it did.
No, I'll take it. I'll take the credit. So, Councilor Ian, sorry.
I knew it was one of you.
So, the way I kind of approached this was that the Streetworks deal, and I hate to use the term deal, but the Streetworks agreement in the LDA, it worked. Unfortunately, it worked to protect the taxpayers. And I say unfortunately because we only found out it worked when it fell apart, the development and the design. But it worked in the sense that our goal was to risk little and get a lot. And so with that mindset, that's how I looked at this particular LDA, which is what are we risking, what are we getting? The risk versus reward, but always making sure that we're not bankers, we're the government. So the risk can't be much at all. It's, regardless of how great the reward is, the risk has to be minimal. We have this fiduciary obligation to the residents of the city and the taxpayers to efficiently use what resources we have, and disposing of an asset is, land is probably one of the biggest kind of tasks we have in that fiduciary obligation. So, long way of asking you, in terms of, and maybe it can't be compared to Streetworks because it's apples versus oranges, but in terms of the protections provided, are you comfortable that this agreement offers a relatively comparable layer of protection for the taxpayers in the event of a material default?
Yeah, it's a different deal. Yes, and I mentioned earlier some of the risks of the Streetworks. It's a very unusual structure where you're paying more than normal taxes. which is fine if the market would bear it, but if it wouldn't, and that would go off into the future, and they defaulted or declared bankruptcy and rejected that agreement, then you've already floated bonds based on an income stream that you no longer have. Now you fall back to add more taxes. So that's one example. And in this case, I think that, again, I don't know why they didn't do that deal. I mean, I think if I were to wonder, that might have been one of the reasons. It may well have been that it didn't pencil out paying whatever it was, 150% or maybe more of what normal taxes were. But at least, that was their risk when they couldn't bring that forward on our terms.
Right.
That is, you can't, if you're going to do it, you can't get out of it because we've got 30 years to pay the bonds. In this case, I guess the risk is you're incentivizing a project that is not what the quote market wants. And so, but I think you're protected. If it doesn't work, if you're not going to get, you're going to either get the benefit of your bargain, or you're going to get your land back, or you won't even sell your land. I think
Which is about as good a protection as you can get.
Yeah.
If you don't get what you're going to get, if you don't get what they say you're going to get, you get your land back. And that's-
Correct.
Is there any other protections that you think are necessary in this agreement that we could implement to better protect the taxpayer, the city, in our interests?
I don't think so. I mean, basically, it's incremental. I mean, this isn't going to close tomorrow. I mean, this is like a purchase and sale agreement on a house. You're not going to be signing that deed until a lot of other things happen. And, one of the key things is the economics of that garage. But basically, it gets the thing moving. It will be there at each step.
And that's always been, the garage has always been this, even with the streetworks arrangement, the garages were always this kind of thing off in the future that the financing would have to work on, and we'd all figure that out.
Well, if you're in
at another
Manhattan,
step.
the garages are easy, or even, now downtown Boston. I've worked in the Massport, the seaport, and that World Trade Center garage is doing pretty well. It didn't always do well, but it's doing very well now. But generally speaking, garages don't pay. They're just basically something you need, and how do you get there? With a minimum exposure without giving up too much of your land. And you want to have ultimately a certain amount of density in the downtown. If you allow something really that's not very dense to go forward on the first project, then you're going to build around that for the next at least 30 years, because that's how long these buildings live. So you're subsidizing it's bad word in my book, but you're basically incentivizing the height and the density so that you'll have more flexibility going forward and be able to attract more density like that in the future. That's great.
Thank you. I don't know if the questions are better for you or for Mr. Geary, but I kind of wanted to walk through some what-ifs, just to, again, just kind of check some boxes here on if there's not performance on the other side of this disposition agreement. So, like, what if before construction, first of all, what's the entity taking the property?
I don't know. It's
It's an LLC.
relying on the entity.
Right.
Okay.
So if the entity sells the land, right, before they start construction, what happens?
Well, first of all, it's not always the agreement. The LDA will be recorded, and it's not allowed. It's not allowed.
Impermissible to sell.
Impermissible.
All right. And what about during construction, 50%, construction's half up, and they want to sell, they want to liquidate? Can they do it at that point? What happens?
No, they have to have a certificate of compliance. I've got a few of these go on, make sure I don't mix my deals up. But certificate of compliance, that is completion before they can sell.
And if they attempt to sell after 100% completion, what rights does the city have with that?
I think once it's completed, they can sell.
And what about the new owner? We don't have any, do we have any sign on from the new owner?
Actually, in that part, you'll know better,
Sure.
because that's not a disaster scenario from my point of view. The building's built and in accordance with the agreement, and at that point, I'm less concerned who owns it from your point of view. But again,
It's all relative, I suppose, it's who's buying, you know, who's buying. And the reason why I ask that is because our fortunes are tied with this, as it's presented to us in this binary yes or no decision, our fortunes are tied to the success of this business, of this business venture in a way. I mean, the better it does, the better the city of Quincy does in terms of revenue. So if it's brought in by a notoriously poor operator that has a bad history of purchasing buildings and then running them into the ground or something, that would be bad for the city. Right. So do we have, Mr. Geary, do we have any recourse in that event? Or any control over?
Well, fortunately, we have lengthy experience. We in the city has lengthy experience with Mr. O'Connell and the projects that he's constructed over the last 30 years and have operated and continues to operate here in the downtown area. That's one of the reasons that they're designated him.
No, I understand, but I'm saying he tries to, if he goes to sell it, because it's not him. I mean, we keep talking about Peter O'Connell, but it's not him, it's a legal entity. At some point, something can happen in which the legal entity is no longer run by Peter O'Connell. I'm sure there's a myriad of ways in which that could happen, and I'm not going to contemplate them, but there is the kind of outrageous scenario where he is no longer the principal. Someone else is the principal, either because of a sale or because of a transfer of assets in another way within that LLC or that holding entity, and then we're dealing with a whole different person. So while I may trust Peter O'Connell, I don't know who the next person in line is. And if, say, they tried to sell to someone that the city found to be disruptive.
There is a section called capital events, and there are guidelines in that section as to what would occur, and I think I may have mentioned that the city would have a number of protections, and quite candidly, I haven't taken a look at them this past weekend, but there are a number of protections, and the city does reap some benefits if it were to agree to a sale, including a percentage of the net sale.
So I think, but that's the key, though, I think, is that the city agreed to the sale.
Yes, that is
Right,
correct.
I mean, that's the key.
That is,
Right.
exactly, that is the key.
So
If the city agrees to the sale, as I mentioned, there's an acceleration clause so that any of the fees that were due to the city would automatically be accelerated. And incidentally, that's triggered if the city agreed to either a sale or a refinancing.
Now, the other scenario, what if something happens in terms of financing, and I think this is, we've all kind of discussed it in passing as a distinct possibility, given the current market situation, but in an inability to start, what happens with that land if this thing never gets off the ground, if the bird never takes flight?
As Mr. Shea mentioned, there's a number of triggering events. And first of all, when the city will not close on the transaction until they have their financing in hand. And 90 days before the financing in hand, there will be an agreement as to the progress of construction, what constitutes executing and prosecuting the construction project itself. That's entered into 90 days before that is to occur, the closing is to occur. So those will be one of the documents we will be working on should the council approve the project.
And what if, again, this is the section title, what if there was some sort of material default during construction of the garage? So I know the plan is to build them concurrently, I think, the garage and the project, but obviously the project has to be on the leading edge of even a concurrent development there, because you need the parking before you move in. So, well, I guess it might be the other way around. But so what if there's, the point is, what if there's, tower goes up, that's fine, but there's a problem with the garage? What happens?
Well, that's one of the advantages of having the redeveloper, Mr. O'Connell and company, involved in the construction of the garage, because it is in our mutual interest and his self-interest to ensure that the garage proceeds. They need the garage, number one, to get the financing, number two, when they complete their project, to accommodate their residents. So they have a vested interest in ensuring that that occurs.
And lastly, what if in this scenario there's poor management? Does the city have any recourse in terms of, again, because our fortunes are tied to the success and the profitability of the venture, does the city have any recourse in this to address poor management of the asset?
To be honest with you, Council, I'd have to take a look. Every question that's posed to me, I go through in my brain all the iterations, all the give and take over the course of the last several months, and so I don't want to give you an answer that may not be the correct answer at the moment. But I'm sure that one way or another we would have recourse, notwithstanding our confidence in Mr. O'Connell, and we understand, and we foresaw the prospect that may turn over, and Mr. O'Connell actually acknowledged that in terms of just his own circumstances, personal circumstances. As you know, it's a family business, and so there are other members of his family, including his son and others who will be coming along, but he has declared his interest in having his family entities hold on to this property.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Garrett. And I'm filled with a sense of, I'm not sure what, thinking of you wandering around Quincy Center at night, just looking into windows of restaurants. I don't know if that's our best advertisement to eat downtown, but nevertheless. Thank you, Chairwoman LaForest. For me, this has been one of the closer calls, I think, that I've had to make up here with this vote. It's like a 49-51 kind of decision. It's a tough call. I essentially come down in favor of supporting it because I'm supporting the idea of this cautious optimism for our downtown. I've always supported the vision for downtown that's been put forth by the mayor's office since the beginning. When Mayor Phelan first began the process of the downtown revitalization, when Mayor Koch carried that forward with Streetworks, I supported that LDA with Streetworks because it protected the taxpayer despite the bold and ambitious arrangement that the Mayor Koch had negotiated at that time. And when Streetworks, as we discussed, when Streetworks fell short, far short of the goal, the city, and more importantly, the taxpayers, lost nothing in the deal. And again, you call it a deal, and it's not so much a deal, but an arrangement. The Streetworks LDA protected the taxpayers' interests. I'm proud of that fact. I think through that process the public process, through the deliberations, the hours of deliberations up here, I think we made it a stronger deal. It was negotiated as a strong deal by the administration. And I think that was proven true when the worst case scenario occurred and we were still in a strong financial position moving forward, having protected the taxpayers. When this LDA for the Hancock lot came to us, I don't think it fully protected the city in the taxpayers in the same way that prior LDA did, but I think it does now with the addition of the language that's been added, the liens that have been put in place, the clarification of some of the language that's been put in place. I think it now does protect the taxpayers in a similar way that the street work did with the land coming. It doesn't get any better than if the developer is unable to perform, the land comes back to the city. It doesn't get any better. We're risking the land, and if it doesn't work out, it comes back to us. The worst case scenario, like we have in Streetworks, means we get the land back and we start this process over. In that instance, the city, the taxpayer are protected. We get our asset and our value back. In the best case scenario, the optimistic scenario is that the project actually happens, which I think is a big if, given the market conditions and everything we know that's happening. But in that best case scenario, this acts as a catalyst for the downtown's growth. And they end up paying well above the amount that they would have if it was simply taxed at the standard rate. And while much has been said that there's no property tax being paid, they're paying something different, which is at a minimum what they would have paid in taxes, and at a maximum much, much more. As I said, I'm going to vote on this based on cautious optimism. The taxpayer is protected in a worst case scenario, and that to me is the bottom line for whether or not this should move forward or not. And that's, for me, is the deciding factor. I think Quincy Center, and we'd all agree, Quincy Center needs to be that economic engine that drives our city's success in the future. We've all signed on to that notion. And I think that this LDA is a step toward that future that we all want and we all work so hard to achieve. So I'll be supporting this, and I would urge my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Councilor Hughes.
Thank you, Chairman LaForest. Just want to thank you and all my colleagues for the robust debate over the past several meetings. Also thank Mr. Geary, the Planning Department, for doing such a thorough and stellar job. Mr. Shea, our counsel, for helping us navigate through this process. And at this point, I would just like to make a motion to approve or recommend this approval. Thank you.
And seconded?
You don't need a second committee, but I'll give it to you.
Good. Normally, please call the roll.
Council King.
Yes.
Council Crowe.
Yes.
Council Colon.
Yes.
Council Finn.
Yes.
Council Harris.
Yes.
Council Hughes.
Yes.
Council Yang.
Yes.
Council Calhoun.
Yes.
Chairman LaForest.
Yes. I now voted in the affirmative. Hearing committee will be now recessing the Ordinance Committee to bring this matter back out into the City Council meeting.
Actually, great. I love the recessing.
Motion being adjourned.